A World Below by Wesley King, a First Chapter Friday read aloud video with the Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Stay all the way to the end to see if you've written it down correctly.
Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be reading to you from A World Below by Wesley King. And you guys, I know I say this a lot, but I really stinking love this book, and I wasn't really sure that I was going to because I don't like scary things. Like, I don't watch scary movies. I don't go on roller coasters. Like, I don't do haunted houses. And when I read the first chapter of this book, I was a little bit scared. Like, actually, the first few chapters, I was a little bit scared. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of a wuss. I don't know if I'm gonna like this. But now that I have made it out to the other side, I think it might be my favorite book I read so far in 2024. And as I record this, it's June. So we're like halfway through. So of all the 25 books I've read so far this year, this might be at the top, which is really saying something because I've read a lot of great books this year. Um, I was trying to think about how I would describe it, and it's kind of like this. Okay, so what if the main character of Hatchet, what if instead of being on a deserted island by himself and having to survive, what if he was with his whole eighth grade class? And instead of being on an island, he was in a cave. Okay. And what if that cave was kind of like Pandora from Avatar? And his teacher wasn't like, okay, so like Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, like his teacher's kind of like that, except he's a dude and he's excited about archaeology and cave stuff and bioluminescence. That's like Hatchet plus Avatar plus the Magic School Bus. Like, that is what we have going on in this book. And I know I'm rambling, but I'm just so excited because it was just really stinking good. Um, I'm going to read you the back because the publisher probably did a better job of describing the story than I did. And then we will get into the story. Mr. Baker's eighth grade class thought they were in for a normal field trip to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. But when an earthquake hits, their field trip takes a terrifying turn. See, I wasn't the only one who was scared. The students are plunged into an underground lake, and their teacher goes missing. They have no choice but to try and make their way back above ground, even though no one can agree on the best course of action. The darkness brings out everyone's true self. Supplies dwindle, tensions mount. Pretty and popular Sylvia does everything she can to hide her panic attacks, even as she tries to step up and be a leader. But the longer she's underground, the more frequent and debilitating her panic attacks become. Meanwhile, Eric has always been a social nobody, preferring to sit at the back of the class and spend evenings alone. Now he finds himself separated from his class and totally by himself underground. That is, until he meets an unexpected stranger. Told from three different points of view, this fast paced adventure novel explores how group dynamics change under dire circumstances. Do the students of Mr. Baker's class really know each other at all? Or do they just think they do? It turns out it's hard to hide in the dark. Ah, it's so good. It's so good. Um, I'm actually not going to read you the first chapter. I know this is First Chapter Friday, but I think the first chapter is maybe just going to confuse you a little bit and like not suck you in the way that the second chapter is. And so it's important. It's very good. Read it when you get this book. But I'm actually going to start with chapter 2, which is called 1 Month Before. Eric was just dozing off when Mr. Baker skipped into class. He barely managed to open his eyes and felt a little saliva pooling on his bottom lip. Eric wiped it, hoping no one had noticed. Eric usually didn't reach full consciousness until at least noon, and that was on a good day. Every morning he dragged himself out of bed like a marionette with half the strings cut, ate a bowl of Cocoa Puffs because it at least gave him a little sugar rush, and then shuffled on to the crowded town bus, his sleep-fogged eyes fixed one foot afront of the other and nothing else. Just that morning he had walked into a light pole outside his house. He had the bruise to prove it, though in fairness it was tough to get up when there was no one to yell at you. His mother worked early at a local cafe as a server, so the house was always empty in the morning. Apart from Patterson Pawmaster, of course, but a 20-year-old border collie probably didn't count. He didn't even bark anymore. He was like a geriatric lassie. Still, Patterson at least waited for an ear scratch from his familiar perch atop the living room couch. He was probably the only one who would notice if Eric just stayed in bed. Eric didn't have any friends, or at least any close ones. He occasionally talked to Dan Pillar at recess, an equally reclusive kid in his class who loved exchanging sarcastic banter, but that was about it. Eric kind of liked it, being alone. It was safer that way. Eric glanced up at Mr. Baker just as he pivoted sharply in front of the smartboard. Mr. Baker nodded his head in greeting, his eyes pausing for just a moment on the disheveled Eric. Morning, class, Mr. Baker said cheerily, clapping two fleshy pink hands together. Mr. Baker was always cheery. He often dressed in checkered cardigans, red and blue, usually wore oversized, almost cartoonish bow ties, and had a pair of thick-framed black glasses that sat perched atop his very large nose. He was constantly touching and adjusting them as he looked around, as if they were a sort of binoculars that he used to zoom in on his students. Morning, Mr. Baker, a few students replied. The Keeners, Eric called them. Side note, my son calls them pick-me girls, which, after he explained it to me, I kind of got. They sat at the front of the class and seemed to genuinely love school, which was annoying first thing in the morning. They were all supposed to love school, technically, seeing as how this was the advanced class, but the Keeners took that to heart more than the rest of them. Joanne, Shannon, the twins, Marta, and Mary, who basically never separated, Naj and Brian were the main ones. Eric could have joined the Keeners. Maybe. His grades were right at the top of the class, and he did sort of like school, other than the early start time. But Eric wasn't one for answering questions or participating. He liked his isolated corner near the back, tucked beside a bookshelf stacked with dusty old math textbooks. Everyone ignored that corner, and Eric along with it. I have some news, said Mr. Baker, still smiling. The Keeners looked attentive. No one else did. Tom Pike was talking in the corner. About the graduation trip? Mr. Baker said meaningfully. That got their attention. Eric saw Sylvia Rodriguez perk up at the far side of class, brushing her hair aside and focusing on Mr. Baker for the first time since he had walked into the class. Sylvia was, well, Eric's favorite person. She was a great writer and the best in the class of biology, particularly botany and zoology, and she was also a star long distance runner. Not to mention, she had the biggest green eyes he had ever seen. Eric spent at least half of his day stealing glances at her when she wasn't looking. Mr. Baker hurried over to his computer, letting the silence hang. Go on, Tom Pike said, eliciting a few laughs. That was Tom. He was the hockey team captain and looked the part, always wearing his brown leather team jacket with matching hair cropped short like a soldier's. But they didn't have stereotypical jocks in the advanced class. Everyone here had to excel in academics, after all. Tom was particularly good at drama and music and almost always got the lead roles. Eric was usually a stagehand. Tom was apparently a gifted mathlete as well, though Eric never went to watch the competitions. Math was his least favorite subject by far, and he refused, on principle, to ever call anyone a mathlete. Two of Tom's teammates, both in hockey and mathletes, were in the class too, Derek and Leonard, and they both followed him around everywhere, snickering and telling idiotic jokes. It was kind of sickening, really, except their jokes switched between hockey and mathematical references, like, dude, that guy skates slower than you solve for X. Even the cool kids in the advanced class were a little weird. Mr. Baker emphatically clipped something on his laptop and then stood up again, grinning from ear to ear as an image appeared on the smartboard. He turned to it, beaming. Eric frowned. It was a picture of a cave, and some stalactites and a bat. What is that? Sylvia asked, sounding concerned. That is Carlsbad Caverns, Mr. Baker said proudly, one of the most intricate and amazing cave systems on Earth, and I, your teacher, have just gotten permission to take you all there. A few people exchanged looks. Eric just sighed and put his head in his hands. Yes, Sylvia? Mr. Baker asked. Last year they got to spend 2 nights in Albuquerque. They got to see a play and eat at La Friche, and then they got to stay in a nice hotel, like with a pool and stuff. Eric glanced up to see Mr. Baker adjust his glasses as if to zoom in a bit more. So? Mr. Baker said, frowning. Sylvia looked flustered. So, I thought that's where we were going, too. Mr. Baker laughed and turned to the smartboard. We're going to Carlsbad Caverns, Sylvia, the home of the Big Room, the largest chamber in North America. Do you even understand how big that cave is going to be? You're going to love it. Trust me, Albuquerque has nothing on this. I have permission slip forms at the end of the day, and it's $20 for the bus. That's it. Last year they had to pay $200. That's crazy. In honor of this exciting news, we're going to start today with a little geology. Who can tell me about limestone? Anyone? Eric looked up to see Sylvia exchange a horrified look with her best friend Ashley Lusky, and then he just smiled and put his head down again. They were going to a cave. Super. 1 month later, Eric woke up to a face in the dark. It was the first time in at least 3 years. Up we get, his mother said, her curly hair already pulled back into a bun. Eric just stared up at her, confused. His stomach felt like an old loaf of bread. What time? He croaked. 5 in the morning, she replied cheerily. We have to be at school at 5:30. This is too early to be alive. She scoffed and threw the blanket off him. Cold rushed in greedily underneath. Nonsense! This is sleeping in. Now get your skinny butt out of bed. With that, she rushed out of the room, and Eric just lay there, covered in goosebumps, and wondering why he ever told his mother about this field trip. He had never expected her to actually volunteer as chaperone. It was basically his worst nightmare. Finally, he swung his legs out of bed, shivering. His room was littered with books. They lined the shelves and covered the desk and were strewn haphazardly about the floor. He kept his favorites on his nightstand in case he ever wanted to read something familiar before bed, number 1 being My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George. He had read that book 100 times at least. It was about a boy named Sam Gribley who left his family's apartment in New York City and set off to live by himself in the woods. Eric had thought about running away plenty of times, and he knew just about every trick for surviving in the wild. But when he told his mom about his big plans, she said she would track him down and he would be very, very sorry. As a result, he hadn't quite mustered up the courage to go. Yet. Yawning, Eric made his way down to the bathroom, wiping the sleep from his eyes. Do you want breakfast? His mom called upstairs. Nothing could sound less appetizing, he said miserably. He stared at himself in the mirror. He was skinny enough that his ribs and collarbone were clearly visible. He had his mother's thick black hair and full lips, but his dad's pointed nose and blue eyes. His skin was a light brown as a result of both parents. They called him biracial at his mom's work once and just mixed at school when he was younger. Both sounded kind of weird, and he didn't feel mixed, he just felt like himself. He brushed his teeth and tried to tame his always tousled hair, a losing battle, and then went to throw on some clothes. Mr. Baker said it was cool in the cave, so he put on some jeans and a t-shirt. He went to grab a windbreaker along with a flashlight and a few other supplies that Mr. Baker had listed, but his mom had grabbed all that and already packed it up by the front door. She seemed oddly excited to go on the field trip. He told her that at least that made one of them. 10 minutes later, they were on their way to school. So, I look forward to meeting some of your classmates, she said. Especially Sylvia. Eric sighed. Please don't look, speak, or even gesture at her today. Then it's going to be obvious that I mentioned her to you, which, by the way, I regret. You are so dramatic. I am pleasantly invisible at school, he reminded her. I don't want that to change. Why not? Because there are worse things than autonomy, he said. She snorted. Sometimes you sound like you're 40 years old. Where did you get that from? Doctor Who, probably, he said, but I'm serious. No referring to her, ever. Please. Fine, she said, but you are 12 now. Sometimes feelings of infatuation can start. Please. No. She laughed and then glanced at him. There's something else I want to mention. Is it about the birds and the bees? Because I'm going to tuck and roll, if so. Well, technically, I was asked out on a date last night, and I would like to go. Eric turned to her, frowning. First of all, gross. Second of all, by who? When? How? Thanks for the vote of confidence, she muttered. A patron at the cafe. His name is Frank, and he is very nice, and I said I would think about it, but I took his number. It's time, Eric. His dad had left 3 years ago. He had a new family in Phoenix, apparently, including Eric's half-sister. He'd only talked to his dad one time since then on his 10th birthday. He'd called for like 2 minutes to say happy birthday, and Eric had said a few mean things that he kind of but not really regretted later, and then that had been the end of their relationship. Well, as long as I never have to hear anything about it, Eric said slowly. Like ever. Deal. Ah, we're here, his mom said. She pulled into the parking lot where a yellow school bus was already parked and waiting. Mr. Baker was standing at the open door looking absolutely and unexpectedly ridiculous in an explorer's cap and matching leather satchel over one shoulder, along with some beige cargo pants hiked way up like suspenders and knee-high black rubber boots. He looked like he was setting out to look for King Kong in the New World. Eric sighed deeply. "So that's Mr. Baker," his mom said. "He looks fun." "That's one word for him," Eric said. Soon Eric was sitting on the bus, curled up against the window, watching one student after another get dropped off. They glanced at him as they got on and kept walking, finding seats near the back, which was apparently cool, despite Eric's long-standing belief that convenience was cooler. Tom was the last one to arrive, his dad looking like a retired quarterback, and when he sat down, Eric's mom and Mr. Baker climbed aboard. Eric's mom plopped down next to Eric, and he thought he heard snickers behind him. "This is going to be so much fun," Eric thought miserably. Mr. Baker stood at the front of the bus and saluted. "Greetings, explorers of the deep." A couple people replied with, "Morning." More looked like they were still asleep. "I bet you have noticed by now that there is no bus driver." "Surprise! I got my license." He held the card up, grinning. "This is going to be so great. Hopefully you have all packed according to my instructions. Just a snack, of course. We'll be stopping for a fast food place on the way home, and I hope you brought lots of water. Now, attendance." He began scrolling down the list, receiving half-hearted responses and sighs. "Eric Johnson?" "He's here," his mother volunteered. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Baker said, smiling and writing the name down. "Just a Ms. now," she replied, and there were more snickers. Eric sank lower in his seat as the attendance continued. "Sylvia Rodriguez," he called. "Here," someone called at the back. Eric's mom went to turn around, and he quickly grabbed her arm. "Remember." "Right," she said, winking. "Your secret is safe with me." Eric tried to find a way to slink down even lower, but his legs were pinned. She was never going to make it through an entire day without blowing his cover. When he was finished, Mr. Baker put the sheet down, clapped his hands, and climbed into the driver's seat. "All aboard! We're off to one of the world's natural wonders. Just 3 hours to go. It will fly by. I have songs, of course, but perhaps we should start with a little summary of what we want to see. Who wants to go first?" Silence. "Okay, then," he said, "I'll start. I've heard wonderful things about the mystery." "Wake me when we get there," Eric muttered, "or better yet, after the trip is over." The bus rumbled out of the parking lot, first jerking to a start and then jumping right over the curb onto the street. Eric's head smacked into the window with a pronounced thud. "Ha!" Mr. Baker shouted. "My apologies, class. Never fear, though. One little bump, and I'm sure the rest of this trip will be smooth sailing. Carlsbad Caverns, here we come. Mush." Eric rubbed his head, scowling. And that's where the story starts, but it is not where the story stops. It goes on in the best, most adventurous, fantastic way, with lots of surprises. And I just know you guys are going to love it. So totally pick up a copy from your school library, favorite local indie bookstore, or if you can't find it those places, I always put an Amazon link down in the video description box. Thank you so much for joining me for this First Chapter Friday. I hope you come back again. Happy reading. I'll see you again next time.
To continue reading A World Below by Wesley King, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the description box. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. I've got almost 200 novels, graphic novels, novels in verse, all sorts of great books waiting there for you to try out. This week's mystery manuscript quote says, "You will have to decide that for yourself." Thanks so much for visiting my channel. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, direct teaching instruction videos, and more. Please like this video and subscribe. I'll see you again next time.